When talking about a movie you feel really nostalgic for, it's hard to know where to really start. There are so many different ways you can approach writing about such a topic. This is where I am today when I consider the film The Sandlot, which, like the film Groundhog Day that I talked about earlier this year, is celebrating its 30th anniversary. Believe me, I've thought long and hard about how I want to approach this video, having rewritten this opening section over and over again, and even after already having thought about it for months. It just never felt right, which was important to me since The Sandlot remains one of my all-time favorite movies, even into adulthood. And even with it being a mid-budget family comedy from the 90s, one clearly aimed at entertaining preteen boys, it has resonated with me over the years, somehow even more so as an adult than when I was their target age. I suppose the big reason for this lies in the idea of nostalgia itself. That feeling of euphoria you get when you think about the good old days, when life was simpler and you made those core memories that define you even to this day. Nostalgia is baked into the very essence of the Sandlot story. Given that it comes from the perspective of a 40-something man reminiscing on his childhood in the San Fernando Valley, specifically in the year of 1962. I was born in 1995, obviously very long after the time in which this movie takes place, so why should this hit so close to home for me? Well, for one thing, baseball is my favorite sport, and the only one which I'm willing to pay for seeing professionals play. The fact that The Sandlot uses baseball as the catalyst for the setting and character interactions automatically makes it intriguing for me. More importantly though, The Sandlot isn't afraid to shy away from relying on the tropes and cliches that plague so many family comedies. There are beats that drive the narrative forward, yes, but the story is also content to move to its own distinct rhythm, the likes of which include scenes of kids just hanging out during the heat of the summer. This is what I would like to focus on for this video. The fact that The Sandlot stands out to me after all these years for its acute sense of how to tap into nostalgia correctly. It honestly executes that idea so much better than most movies I can even think of. I'll focus first on how the film utilizes core memories to drive the plot forward, and then less significant but nonetheless fond memories that reminisce on the simple times shared with friends. Those lesser memories connect the audience with the characters, similarly to how the main character Scott Smalls slowly connected with the guys who played on the titular Sandlot each day. But understand that as I talk about this movie, I'm not going to be doing a big deep dive into its filmmaking, storytelling, or anything like that. I mainly just wanted to talk about why it's affected me so much over the years. Oh, and it will be spoiled pretty heavily, so consider this warning to click away if you haven't seen The Sandlot before. First things first, when we initially meet adult Scott Smalls, he opens his narration with this.
There is one all-time greatest moment in the history of sports, and it happened in the 1932 World Series. The story goes that in the bottom of the ninth inning, with 2 outs, a full count, and the tying run on base, Babe Ruth raised his arm and pointed to the center field bleachers. No one believed it, because nobody had ever done it before. But the Babe was calling his shot. On the next pitch, the great Bambino hit a towering 400-foot home run. And even although he'd been a hero before that, that's pretty much how he became a legend. 30 years later, a kid named Benjamin Franklin Rodriguez became a neighborhood legend. It was in the greatest summer of my life when he taught me how to play baseball, and he became my best friend. And he got me out of the biggest pickle I'd ever be in.
So, we can gather the idea that if Scott is willing to put his best friend Benny Rodriguez on a similar level to one of the greatest baseball players ever, he must be pretty significant to the story. And yeah, he is. There's an argument that could be made that Benny is a person without any real character flaws, but the fact that Scott perceives him as this legendary figure reinforces the point. After all, when we meet Scott's younger self, he's not exactly the image of self-confidence. His anxieties about not being able to fit in and find a group he can genuinely feel connected to are very relatable, for both kids and adults experience those struggles all the time, myself included. Of course, his mom helps as much as she can by encouraging him to get his hands dirty and experience life before it all passes by, and his stepdad tries to teach him how to play catch, but we all know how that goes. Obviously, Scott loves and appreciates his parents, just like how I did and still do to this day, When you're a growing boy who's trying to fit in, though, your limited perspective makes it hard to deal with life if you don't have any friends. That definitely makes it tough to watch Scott embarrass himself with his athletic ineptitude out at the titular Sandlot. Sure, there's also humor to be had there. Even so, there's a genuine sense of pity that the viewer could feel watching Scott in these moments. This makes it all the more impactful that Benny, who everyone considers to be without equal in terms of baseball skills, stops everything to give Scott a crash course on how to catch and throw, the bare minimum of how to play sports, let alone baseball. What stands out to me here is that he uses an example that is relevant to Scott's experiences, empathizing with his more analytical perspective, and gives simple but clear directions on what he should do.
You ever have a paper route?
I helped a guy once.
Okay. Well, chuck it like you would throw a paper. When your arm gets here, just let go. Just let go. It's that easy.
How do I catch it?
Just stand there and stick your glove out in the air. I'll take care of it.
And wouldn't you know it, this ultimately happens.
Please catch it. Please catch it. Please catch it. He's all right.
Told you so, man. Okay, let's play some ball.
Yeah, let's play some ball.
All right.
I think it's safe to say that out of all the guys Scott meets at the Sandlot, Benny is the one who has the strongest effect on him personally. After all, Benny is the one who genuinely believes he has the potential to play baseball, enabling Scott to achieve his goal of fitting in. I'll touch on that more later though. Throughout the course of the second act of the film, Scott does foster relationships with the other guys who play on the Sandlot. Once he's accepted into the group, that is where the story kicks into full gear. Well, it sort of does, and it sort of doesn't. But that's one reason why I love this movie even now, because it refuses to let the machinations of the plot dictate how these characters bond with one another. There's no overarching goal or set of stakes that are chaining the characters down to servicing the plot. Although, I should add that any time that is dedicated to exposition is always framed in a way that makes sense to the interactions these kids are having. For example, when we learn about the backstory of the Beast, all of the boys are sleeping over in the Sandlot's large treehouse, which makes sense for Squints to then tell this sensationalized campfire story. Even when the story has to be, you know, a story, it feels natural to this film's tone of being clued into a preteen boy's perspective. Otherwise, a lot of time in the middle chunk of the film is spent just observing these kids getting into all kinds of mischief, whether it be Squints causing a stir at the pool, Bertram handing everyone tobacco at the fair,
Big Chief. The best.
Ham taking turns throwing insults with this guy,
You play ball like a girl.
and then eventually all of the antics they get into in attempting to retrieve the signed Babe Ruth ball from the clutches of the Beast. Some parents might call it irresponsible for a movie to show kids not only getting into trouble, but also for the near constant trash talk. However, I always appreciated, and still do, that these scenes highlight how boys actually are, especially when they're with a group of other guys they could legitimately call friends. Any guy could tell you that their real friends will give them crap on a near constant basis, just like how they would have at a younger age. These actors did a stellar job making it seem like they were deeply connected friends both in front of and behind the camera due to the obvious chemistry they all shared. This interconnectedness allowed the comedy to shine through, and it made their characters' behavior all the more genuine. Such only adds to the authenticity of adult Scott reminiscing on the good old days. I'm sure there are more stories from Scott's childhood that could have been told, but the exact right amount are shared so that the movie's runtime doesn't overstay its welcome. While we get enough of an impression as to how tight-knit these guys all would have been back in 1962, I know that every time I go back and watch this movie, I find myself appreciating the film's structure more and more due to how much it taps into my own sense of nostalgia. Like I mentioned at the beginning of this video, I did not grow up in the 60s. I was definitely a late 90s and early 2000s kid, being too young to truly be a millennial, but also too old to be considered Gen Z either. The time period being depicted was even too early for my own parents. but there's just something so universally relatable about all of the things that these guys go through. It's not just the fact that kids get into all kinds of trouble that their parents never end up learning about, or that they share a bond over a common interest in playing baseball. It speaks to those special moments that lead to memories built with beloved friends, like letting a fireworks show distract them all from a nighttime game on the 4th of July. The Sandlot is so confident in its offbeat rhythm, chill vibe, and cast of diverse characters that the unconventional storytelling leads to the second half of the movie really paying off. Much of this section of the movie is dedicated to what Scott has hyped up as for the entire movie, which is
The biggest pickle of all time.
we learn that pickle to be that on the day where Benny destroys a baseball, Scott instinctively snatches his stepdad's autographed ball from Babe Ruth without permission. Incidentally, Scott hits his first home run with that very ball, sending it to the infamous backyard where the so-called kid-eating beast lays in waiting. Obviously to a set of kids whose limited perspective made it seem like an English Mastiff was the demon spawn of the devil himself, this event made Scott a dead man walking.
That ball you just aced to the beast is worth, well, more than your whole life, man.
I don't feel so good.
Certainly, with all of the crazy and hilarious attempts they made to retrieve the ball from the beast, that belief would only solidify in Scott's mind as he thought his life was forfeit. Again, the movie is playing into the perspective of children very well, which just emphasizes how well David Mickey Evans understands the power of remembering frightening memories from our childhoods. All of this, though, eventually feeds back into that earlier idea that Scott looks up to Benny as his personal hero. The fact that Benny would go so far as to risk his own life just to save Scott the heartache of broken trust with his stepdad deeply moves him. And once the beast is bested by Benny, he does his part to break down the barriers that separated the Sandlot crew from Mr. Myrtle, both literally and figuratively. Of course, this then leads to one of the sadder sequences in the film, but one that is quite laden with truth. Scott, reminiscing on the fading memories of his old friends, progressively talks about how each guy eventually moved on to bigger and better things. In Bertram's case, you get this subtle yet deeply sobering comment.
Bertram got really into the 60s, and no one ever saw him again.
Everything that is said about these guys, as they all slowly fade away, is emblematic of how friendships tend to evolve with age. This might not be the case with everyone, but I know for myself that since moving on from high school, I barely hang out with most of the people I used to kick back with. That's not for a lack of desire to spend time with them, that's just how life is. With advancing age comes increased responsibilities, and there's little time for the simpler pleasures, such as gathering together on the Sandlot for an endless game of baseball. As much as I would love to keep connecting with some of these people, it just gets hard to find the time for everyone. For me, when I do have time to give other people, it's mostly just my wife and family that receive such attention. But I can tell you that for those people who stick by you through thick and thin, no matter what those situations may have been, you will always have an enduring friendship with them. You can count on their support through any kind of trial, just like how they can count on you. Their love and support will extend to wherever life takes you all. This ends up being the case for Scott and Benny, for even well into their adult lives, they remain true to one another. Scott grew up to be a sports commentator, and Benny fulfilled becoming a baseball legend as a player for the LA Dodgers. And wouldn't you know it, in Benny's moment of making baseball history, Scott is there to cheer him on, just as Benny did for him when they were kids.
And there he goes! He's stealing home! They don't see him! I don't believe it! He's stealing home! He's stealing home and they don't see him! I don't believe it! They don't see him! The pitch! There's the 30s and the 30s! Safe! Safe! I got it! No way! Safe! 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 I don't believe it! The kid's still home! The kid's still home!
It's not an accident that the same music swells in this moment, as well as the moment when Scott learns how to catch and throw. These moments of triumph, both big and small, show how the victories in life can mean the world to someone, especially when they're shared with those you love and care about. It's why it hits me so hard when Scott gets to support his best friend accomplishing something so great, since the best things in life are experienced with others. For me, I think of all the memories I have shared with those who have stood by me throughout most of my life, whether it be my beloved wife, or my buddies who regularly get together with me to hang out or create videos for the channel. The Sandlot is an ode to relationships such as these, and that is why I will continue to cherish it for years to come. And that's it! Thank you for watching and listening to me wax poetic with a movie I care very deeply about. If you liked what you saw and would be eager to see more of what I have to offer, please consider subscribing to the channel and joining the notification squadron so that you won't miss out on my future videos. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you all have a great one.